Welcome to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
I'm Shannon Lawrence.
And I'm MB Partlow.
Quick content warning before we get started. This podcast may contain language and disturbing content, so enter at your own risk. A quick apology. There are some sound quality issues with this episode, so we've done our best to pare them down, and we apologize for any inconvenience. Thank you for listening.
Oh, we're recording.
Yay! I'm telling you, if you do something important or do something embarrassing or important,
And then it's like, here we are. Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Disjointed episode.
Buckle up, bitches.
That's right.
We
were having technical difficulties, and then it wouldn't record, and then suddenly it was recording, y'all. So there we are. And we have a guest this week. What a shocker, since we have a guest every month now. We have DeAnna Knippling. DeAnna, why don't you introduce yourself?
I don't know who I am. We discussed this. I'm like, you think I'm joking? I'm going to get on camera and you're going to say, who are you? And I'm going to blank.
You write stuff.
Yeah. I am living in Florida, and I used to live in Colorado, and I write a lot of things. I've clocked over 80 books now, and my latest book is I gotta pitch something. My latest book is The Witch House by DeAnna Knippling. It is in the spirit of Coraline. It's about witches,
And it's a middle grade?
It's a middle grade, but it's the kind of middle grade that, like, when you think back to what it was really like when you were 12 and you're like, should 12-year-olds be reading about actual 12-year-olds? No, that's not okay. But yeah, it's a book for actual 12-year-olds who are going through actual 12-year-old shit. So yeah.
Good. Yeah, I remember when I was more engaged online and like blogging before I had to reel all that back, and watching discussions on YA and how far you could go with YA, which is pretty far. You can go pretty far with YA. That's the thing. We've seen it. But there's just a ton of people who think there should be no sex and probably not even flirting, some of them. We live in a puritanical society and they think that shit doesn't happen. And I'm like, I could tell you stories about middle school. I can tell you stories about elementary school where I grew up. So
yes,
if you think that's not really fucking happening, then you're ignorant.
Yes, I remember one of my daughter's friends at the time. She was joking around with something and saying stuff that was very adult just to try and shock me. And the phrase, "No, really, you can get pregnant having sex standing up," and her face went white. And she was either 12 or 13 at the time. Oh, and I said, okay, we're having quick sex talk now.
Yeah, I guess we're having this.
I'm the mom who knows the shit and will share it with you. So everybody sit down. We're going to have a lecture.
I mean, I remember hearing that at about that age. And even then I was like, no, I think that's bullshit. I think you can get pregnant having sex standing up.
Yeah.
I never heard you.
It was the white face, though.
Yes.
Yeah, I never heard you couldn't. I didn't know that was a thing where that was being like.
I didn't know that was a rumor.
Okay.
At 12, I was like, I grew up on a farm.
Well, right.
Sure animals have sex standing up.
You're like, guess what? They all stand up. I spent a little bit of growing up time on the farm, but I did not live there full time except for right before we moved to Maryland because it was my grandmother's farm. I will say, I guess now it would be considered open range. We did have hay, but they lived in the woods in Turner, Oregon. So it was a farm in the forest. And they had cattle. It was a cattle farm. And I think at one point there were chickens, but cattle by the time I was spending any time there, they had reeled it back and they were just doing the cattle. And then that was their last head of cattle. We'll say that 7-year-old Shannon got the shock of her life when she found out what happened to all the babies she brought up with bottle feeding and all of that. And I went there and I was like, where are the cows? Actually, I think I was 6 when they sold off. Well, when they had them slaughtered and sold them off. So yeah, it was like, where are the cows? And they're like, oh, they're dead. They're dinner now. And I was like, pardon?
I remember being on my cousin's farm and my Uncle Harold walks out the door with his shotgun. And I was like, where is he going? Because it wasn't hunting season.
Right.
So I was like, and he was not the kind of man who just toted around a shotgun. So I was like, where's he going? Well, he's slaughtering a cow today. I'm just like, what?
Oh.
Ugh. That was, so I was actually kind of okay with that. But then after the slaughter, he brings in the heart and the liver and the tongue. And he was like, and he put them in the sink and he looks at me and he goes, are you going to take some of this home for your mom? And I was like, I hope not.
I would prefer not to.
I do not want any of that. No, I do. Mom doesn't want any. Your mom loves liver. No, she's become allergic. She just, no, we don't need it. I couldn't possibly take it from you.
I don't think either of my grandparents could do the killing. They outsourced. They had a butcher come pick them up and do them. But then they still had their neighbor. They would let him open a gate between the properties sometime and send the cattle over to go ahead and feed on our grass and all that good stuff. So that they like had some sort of deal with him, I guess. My grandma was rather savvy about having various deals. She lived on a mountain in Sisters, Oregon, and she was the person that let him put the cell phone tower on her property, and she got paid every month plus a free cell phone. And It was one of those disguised ones that looks like a tree or whatever. Her neighbors were so mad at her, and she was like, right, well, I'm living high on the hog right now, so fuck all of you. That was my grandmother. But yeah, no, that was how I got caught in a stampede when I was 7, probably, because we moved when I was 7.5 to Maryland. So that would have been when we were there. And I had to, my brother was, let's see, he's almost 6 years younger than I am. So he would have been about 2, though, we'll say, at that point. And he was a chunk of monk. And in came the stampeding cattle that must have gotten scared by something when they came through. And it was just me and my friends and my brother. And she booked it. She was gone. I was trying to pick up my brother who weighed about the same as I did at that point. And chuck him over the fence. I had to climb through the barbed wire to get away from the stampede. So like farm life isn't dull. But the funny thing is, though, I don't even it had to have been a pretty laid back half-ass farm because my grandpa was still a dental surgeon at the time. So yes, he was a dental surgeon and a farmer.
Well, a lot of but not a dairy farmer.
But if you grew up on a farm, you were accustomed to it. So you do all the chores in the morning and you do all the chores at night, work in between, and then work your ass off on the weekend.
Yeah, because he was a dental surgeon in Salem, which wasn't that far away. You get to every day when you leave Turner and go to Salem, you get to drive by Oregon State Penitentiary, where 2 of my grandfathers worked. You get a whole history of Oregon here. And now my cousin is a prison guard at Oregon State Penitentiary.
Oh, wow.
And she gets along. She listened to my grandpa who was a guard. One of my grandpas was a guard. And he said, you treat them with respect and you're nice to them and they will give you the same respect. And that is why both of them have made it through unscathed through prison riots. My cousin actually got protected by one of the prisoners because one of her own people accidentally maced her. One of the other guards accidentally maced my cousin in the middle of the riot, and she heard. And so one of the prisoners came in to cover her and protect her and talk to her because she couldn't see anything and say, I'm right here. So it worked, right? Just being a decent human being means nobody took advantage of her being blind and unable to breathe.
And I know it can happen, but I'm still like, how do you accidentally mace someone?
You're trying to mace somebody next to her. It mace, it's mist.
Yes,
So,
it's an aerosol. It's a spray.
Chances are you probably get a little taste of it if you really have to mace somebody, right? That's why cops have to get maced in their training.
Yes.
Maced and tased.
That sounds like a book title. Maced and tased.
That was the
That was the name I danced under.
That was the name.
Maced and tased.
Maced and tased.
That should be the
name.
The top had to moonlight as a exotic dancer.
Right? If you've seen me dance, I do look a little like I've been tased.
It could be the name of their OnlyFans. Maybe. I wonder if that's a kink for somebody, just to watch somebody being tased and maced.
Everything is a kink for somebody.
Is, I know. What was that? I was reading something. Oh, it's called Cleopatra and Frankenstein, and I'm not sure I'm enjoying it. Here, do you ever have the problem when I read literary, because I mostly read genre, I sit there often and go, I don't understand what the point of this entire book is. Like, we're not driving. There's no mystery to solve. We're not on a mission of any sort, right? Like, just weird everyday shit is happening. And I'm like, I need a point or I can't care about this. And that is how I feel about this current book I'm reading. I guess their marriage is going to devolve. I guess that's what's happening. But I'm like, who the fuck cares? That's supposed to be a subplot.
No, I think that does happen. I don't think it happens with good literary fiction, but with some, it's like, oh, this will come back to haunt me, but it's navel gazing.
Yeah, it is.
And I'm like, I don't need to gaze at someone else's navel for that long. Some are fascinating because the descriptions and the detail about people's lives can be fascinating, or it can be amusing, but sometimes it's just so fraught with ennui that it's
this one I'm like, the first half of the book is about just nothing, them doing drugs and partying, and I'm like, okay, great. I've done this. I don't think it's actually not that fascinating. A lot of us have done this, so I didn't do the drugs they're doing in it, but I'm just saying, like, who cares? Who the fuck cares? How is this a book? And I keep pushing through, and I think I'm going to take a Janet Ivanovich break because I can read that.
Okay, do not put that book in the pile of books you saved for me. You're good. I'll pass on that one.
The question is whether you want the John Waters book.
Yes.
Yes. All right. I'm telling you, it's
Is it his biography?
No. It's been written by John Waters.
It's what?
Fiction.
Oh.
There's a talking penis in it.
Okay. But what's the weird?
I have often been under the impression that penises are able to dial the phone. So one that can talk. I mean, really? That's what a booty call is. The penis dialed the phone, and that's who you're talking to. So
why did they call it a booty call if it's a penis dialing the phone? It's a butt dial. Come on.
It's like you can see the gears turning in my head. I'm trying to come up with a clever retort.
It's like I got nothing.
It's just bouncing around in there like a ping pong ball in a big empty box. That's back in the day. That was what we always said when you got those late night or drunk calls. It's like, yeah, his penis called the other night.
I'm like, this would explain. Like, maybe they don't call. Maybe they just take selfies. This would totally explain the whole dick pic thing.
I should not say this. So I should not say this. I think I'm the only woman on the planet who has never received an unsolicited dick pic or solicited. I don't solicit them. So
okay, all right, we'll go with that.
I haven't been asking people for them. So, but no, I've never gotten those random guy just sends you a dick pic.
I've never gotten one of those. For some, like, the period where I was vulnerable to that. It was everybody wanted to message you on altnet, whatever, like what color are your panties? What the fuck? This is alt-rec vampires, man. At least ask how big my fangs are.
Ask me if I have fang style vagina dentata. That's the correct conversation.
Right. There you go.
That's witty. It's a decent pickup line. What color are my underwear? You're looking at a throat, bud. This is a 6-inch throat, man.
Right.
I am stacked. See?
Look at that. I have an extra long neck. Now you're intimate. Yeah.
Now you're interested.
Now, see, in literary fiction, that would be a swan-like neck.
I just get.
Has nobody seen a swan before? No. Like, you hope that's not a swan-like neck. Shit, man.
It's very long and looks like a snake.
And then there's like this one spot that you're like, ooh, you see a chiropractor for that.
Bird
I
chiropractor.
don't think that's okay. I think your head is way too heavy for that neck.
Now, are you just giving me shit, or is that a true? Is that constructive criticism? It could be.
All
criticism is.
I was going to say all criticism is constructive criticism if you take it right.
If you're brave enough.
Yes. No, I'm not. I hate
You need Shannon close her eyes.
All right. I had something I was going to say and then I forgot it. It was right out of my head. But like everything else sags. So imagine if you had like that long and thin of a neck, like how low your head would be by the time you were 50.
Right around your boobs. It would be, you'd be tucking it in your pants with your boobs. It'd be hitting your butt in the back if it fell down the back.
I don't think that's really a great, like, tucking is not a great way to deal with your boobs. And if that's how you're doing it, we need to talk about this whole not wearing a bra thing.
If you have to tuck them into your pants, then you probably should definitely be wearing a bra. Probably.
I think I have a few years left before I have to tuck them into my pants.
said the bishop to the actress.
I say. Oh my goodness.
No.
Related and unrelated. That yesterday I ended up, because I like watching reels or whatever. I like watching videos on all the things. Nobody actually watches them if you share them, really, but
I do.
I
know, but that's about it. Like there's like also and then one random person who happened to watch that one. But I watched one and it was the tribe that does the rings around the neck. I guess I'd never, in my brain, I think that I thought it was the type, almost like those bracelets that you just kind of pinch together behind, right? Like you would just put it around the neck and then fasten it. And no, I watched a video of them doing it where it was actually taking that coil and wrapping it in. There's like a person that does this for you. And it was fascinating to watch. But my brain went, oh, I thought it was so much simpler than that and that they would be removable.
Yeah.
Nope. It's like like you would think of a coil of wire or something like that,
that just
metal is. And then you see them kind of rolling it around and bringing it in to condense it.
Mm-hmm.
That just looks so uncomfortable.
And yet elegant.
Fair.
Yeah.
Yeah. I know. They said that it's not painful or anything like that, but I'm like, man, I have enough trouble sleeping if I have to wear clothes. Like if I had to have metal around I got my ears re-pierced and then I had to keep earrings in, and that's driving me nuts, sleeping with earrings in, even though I got these tiny cheapy little studs to put in there for that. So it would, oh well, it's not like I wouldn't have insomnia in some other world if I were doing other things.
There is no reality in which Shannon does not have insomnia.
There's nothing more I could do.
That's inconceivable. That is the reality that does not exist.
It's true. Like in all my parallel worlds, I'd be like, "Hey, do you sleep? And how do you sleep?" Like, can we talk about that really quick.
It'd be like the Amazing Spider-Man, the Amazing Shannon. Do you sleep? Fuck no.
Across the Shannonverse. It would be awake across the Shannonverse.
Oh my
Yes,
God.
it would. It would absolutely.
That's terrifying to think about. It's good there's only one of me. I feel like
Are you
there's
a
a lot.
superhero? No, but you wouldn't know. People are just, the only reason what my superpower is? I'm not stupid.
I like superpower. No, I want to write about a group of people with
I walk up to people and I punch them in the face and they fall asleep.
Oh, I heard the best word the other day. Hold on. I got to look it up.
What would your superpower be? I don't know. Stupefy. We didn't actually discuss who was going first, so I guess I'm just going to so that we don't.
It is your turn to go first.
Okay, that works. I'm going to be doing 2 completely unrelated cases because both of them by themselves were too short for me to do like a really good, thorough piece. And one of them is actually super short, but I was like, I feel like telling this story even though it's super short.
Go for it.
All right. So I'm going to be talking about Kent Newton and Timothy Pitzen. And that's Timothy with 2 M's because his mom wanted him to be unique.
Kent Newton and who?
Timothy Pitzen.
Okay.
With 3 M's.
Timothy.
With 5 M's. There are 5 M's.
And I put lots of T's in
silly.
Pitzen.
It's only 4 M's.
Pitzen. Timothy.
Sorry.
With 3 Z's.
Put it on the screen.
If you put a 4th, you would fall asleep while you wrote it.
So it's Timothy.
It is Timothy. Which is funny because in Italian, they have a lot of words. They're very distinctive about pronouncing both if you have 2 letters in a row, like Timothy in Italian. Once I figured that out, then it became easier.
Timothy.
Timothy. The morning of Sunday, August 31st, 1975, 2 years before I would be born, dawned with a heavy mist over the pond by a campsite at the Natanis Campground in Chain of Ponds, Maine. I like that city name. It's a township, actually. Chain of Ponds. 6 miles from the Canadian border. It was a wilderness area known to mostly locals. The Newton family were camping at a site off a logging road with their 2 small children, 4-year-old Kurt and 6-year-old Kimberly, in their new-to-them tent camper. It was a used one, but they had very excitedly been able to buy it. They had a big breakfast around the campfire to wait for things to warm up with the sun. At about 10 a.m., Kurt's mom, Jill, picked up muddy sneakers and headed over to a bathroom on site where she could wash the shoes, and then she hung them to dry. Kimberly left on a bike ride, and Ron, their father, got into his truck to go chop firewood. That was allowed. A friend camping in her own trailer heard Kurt yell out, "Daddy, Daddy!" but she didn't go look. Jill arrived back to the campsite 10 minutes later, but Kurt wasn't there. She walked around and asked everyone if they'd seen her son, but none of them had. Kurt wasn't one to go any distance alone, often fairly clingy and afraid if he got separated from his parents or sister. She talked about being at a store and just rounding a corner, and if he happened to stop and look at something, he would panic, and she would find him like a blubbering mess, so he did not do well away from anybody. He was also afraid of forests. His sister was kind of fearless, and she would try and get him to do all these things, and he was timid. She figured Ron had taken him with him to get the wood, and she went about her usual cleanup. A quarter of a mile away, between 10:30 and 11 a.m., a 12-year-old girl named Lou Ellen Hansen had gone out for a walk. A young blonde boy wearing a navy blue baseball-themed coat with Manchester written across the front and red and black corduroys pedaled by on a tricycle. She yelled out to him, asking if his parents knew where he was, but he was so determined to get somewhere that he didn't even look at her. He didn't acknowledge her. He just sped past her. I've seen that kid. My brothers had their Power Wheels. Lou Ellen continued back to the campsite. She's 12. What's she going to do? A little farther down the road, Llewellyn's dad, Jack Hansen, who was the caretaker for the campground, found an abandoned tricycle. He walked it over to the dump and heaved it in, figuring it had been left behind by a camper, fallen off their vehicle, and they probably wouldn't be back for it. Ron Newton arrived back at the campsite. Jill, seeing he didn't have Kurt, began to panic. They got to a game warden who contacted a game warden inspector and set up a search party. The surrounding campers all pitched in, helping to search for the little boy. They all thought Kurt might have wandered into the woods thinking his dad was there and that he wouldn't have gotten that far, especially because, again, he wouldn't even go into the woods to play with his sister back at home. They were concerned, though, because it was expected to drop into the 20s overnight. Military choppers were brought in. One flew low over the woods using a loudspeaker to call out to Kurt, telling him to follow the chopper, that his mommy and daddy were waiting for him, keep walking and not sit down, and that sort of thing. They're trying to coax him out of the woods. News reached the nearby cities, and more people swarmed in to help with the search. It was organized and led by a veteran of wilderness searchers. In fact, he'd never come back out of the woods without the person he'd gone in searching for. Not ever. In all of his time doing it, had he not found who he was looking for. Until now. Night plunged down upon them with no sign of Kurt, and the temperature dropped to 26 degrees. When searchers pulled back for the night, Jill and Ron wouldn't give up, using loudspeakers to call out into the woods. Their hope was that with the new stillness and silence, he'd be able to hear his parents and come to them. As soon as the sun rose the next day, the searchers were back at it. Bloodhounds were brought in, but they kept losing the scent among so many others because by then there'd already been over 200 searchers, right? So it's too late. They should have been brought in the beginning. But they thought this would be a pretty simple thing. This isn't unheard, right? And typically don't get that far. Jill had heard of a plane used in Vietnam in the war that used infrared sensors to detect guerrillas in the jungles. It was really sensitive. They said it could tell the blacktop from the white lines in the road by that differentiation. So she begged and begged until it was agreed to send the C-130H up from Florida. The plane found nothing. Several days passed, and the search team had swelled to such an extent that when Ron lost his pin twice in the woods out of his pocket, the searchers found it and brought it back. And that was according to a Yankee Magazine article called The Day Kurt Newton Disappeared. Yet they found no sign of Kurt. There was not an article of clothing. It was supposed to have warmed up that day, so the mom felt like Jill thought, well, he would have taken his jacket off somewhere probably. He would have gotten warm and taken that right off. They didn't find a jacket. They didn't find shoes. The tricycle had been found in the dump now, and the stories told by Llewellyn and her father were registered by police. At no point was there even a sign of footprints, and it had been muddy. They didn't find his footprints. They looked for tricycle tracks before they had found the tricycle, and it was just that one route to where he had found it. The dump was searched. Buildings were searched. Some outbuildings were even disassembled so that they could go through them that thoroughly. Campers and locals were questioned. Some were polygraphed. By the fourth night, Ron hadn't allowed himself to have even a minute of sleep. So his coffee was laced with tranquilizers.
Wow.
Laced it with tranquilizers so he would get some sleep. Jill hadn't gotten much sleep, but she had gotten some. She'd had little naps. The night of Friday, September 12th, the search was finally called off. It had been 15 days of searching with nothing to show for it. By the end, over 3,000 people had joined the search. A lot of those experts coming in from the outside to help. And there was military. There was a lot of people who knew what they were doing. His parents didn't give up. They stayed for 2 more weeks until it was time for Kimberly to start school. At that point, they took turns going back up each weekend, and they weren't the only ones. The tracker, Dwayne Lewis, kept returning to search himself. He could not believe it was possible for them not to have found Kurt. There was no way a 4-year-old had made it past where 3,000 people could have found him, but he was determined. The Newtons posted signs everywhere in town and in the woods. They posted notices to hunters to watch for a small child in the woods. I mean, we all know no child would have still been alive out there, but I give them props for...
They kept trying.
Yes. When it snowed, Ron took his snowmobile out, figuring he could get even farther than he had on foot that way. They had thousands of missing posters printed, personally distributing in Maine and Quebec. Like they drove around in like all these cities in the general area, across the border and cities around there, going to gas stations and going to post offices and going to all these places. And of course, the police were also had sent out notices to police departments. They had at one point over 75,000 printed up because they had friends in the printing business who helped them.
Wow.
Ooh.
They ordered telephone books from major cities in the US and Canada and mailed flyers to every single individual in the phone books until they had sent them to everybody in those phone books. When enough time had passed that they figured anyone who'd kidnapped Kurt would be putting him into school, so years we're talking they're doing this, they spent time researching until they had a list of the superintendent of every single school district in the US and Canada, and they sent every single one of them posters so that they could put them up and spot him if he showed up to the schools.
Wow.
While there are plenty of tips that came in over the years, none of them led to Kurt. Last I could find, the couple were still together, which I thought that was worth mentioning because a lot of time there's a divorce with something like this. Your marriage just can't survive something that awful. And they've never given up hope. They figure it is assumed now that he was kidnapped. There's never been a body found. That was those trees were used by a paper mill. So, I mean, that forest has been basically processed and gone through and nothing was ever found. If you know anything about his disappearance, you're encouraged to call the Maine State Police at 1-800-228-0857. And now I'm going to fast forward. On the morning of May 11th, 2011, James Pitzen dropped off his 6-year-old son, Timothy, at Greenman Elementary School in Aurora, Illinois, where Timothy attended kindergarten. James said, "I love you and be good." And the little boy hefted his Spider-Man backpack and ran to meet his teacher. When James showed up to pick Timothy up that day, he was told by the school that his wife had picked the boy up about half an hour after he dropped him off. She told them there was a family emergency. There was no emergency yet. James hurried home, finding it empty, then went to where his wife, Amy, worked. She wasn't there either. He kept calling her cell phone, but she never answered. Family members didn't know where he was or where she was. He went to bed that night, confused and frightened, and the next morning when he woke up to a still empty house, he called the police to report his wife and son missing. Then on May 14th, shortly after noon, a maid entered room 108 at the Rockford Inn in Rockford, Illinois, and discovered a woman's body. Identified as 42-year-old Amy Fry Pitzen, it was discovered that she had taken a ton of antihistamines, they were a lethal dose, and used a knife to slit her own wrists and throat. She'd left behind a suicide note. What she hadn't left behind was Timothy, who was nowhere to be found, and who was not present when she checked into the hotel room. Portions of the suicide note read, quote, "Tim helped with that for a while, and maybe if Jim and I had been better, I would have been okay, but everything just fell apart. And this time there were just too many pieces for me to pick up again. End quote. I can't take the chance of Jim hurting Tim because of my choices, so I've taken him somewhere safe. He will be well cared for and says that he loves you. Please know there is nothing you could have said or done that would have changed my mind." She stated that he would never be found. James said they'd been arguing about money and her taking off on a cruise for her birthday with a friend instead of him. He confirmed they had discussed the possibility of divorce and that he had found out she'd recently met up with her first husband for dinner. James was her fourth husband. He said he'd told her that if she wanted a divorce, that was fine, but that he'd be fighting for custody of Timothy because she wasn't in a position to keep full custody. Amy, as confirmed by her entire family, had mental health issues for which she was medicated. She had suffered severe depression since at least her first divorce. While they'd been dating long distance in 2003, she had what was referred to as an incident by the family, where she took a bunch of pills while sitting on a cliff, passed out, and fell, getting injured. It was felt that she had actually been attempting suicide. In 2004, after a positive pregnancy test, the two got married. Police began investigating immediately. The knife only had her blood on it, but there was blood in the back of her car that was found to belong to Timothy. Police thought the worst, but family members mentioned Timothy had a history of nosebleeds, and Amy had mentioned specifically a big one in the car recently, so it was thought that the blood might be from that. There was evidence on the car that had been parked in a grassy area at one point, possibly close to a river or body of water. Authorities were able to trace her last steps from hotel check-ins and security footage from various places. After leaving the school around 8:30 a.m., Timothy's hand in hers, Amy dropped off her vehicle at a repair shop. Records showed it was about 10 a.m. Someone from the shop dropped the two of them off at the Brookfield Zoo. At 3 p.m., they arrived back at the shop to pick up the vehicle. From there, they went to a place called Key Lime Cove Resort, a water park in Gurnee, Illinois. They stayed there overnight, checked out, and stopped at a store where she purchased clothes and toys for Timothy, which included a toy truck and coins with animal imprints on them. She drove to the Kalahari Resort in Wisconsin Dells, Wisconsin, where they stayed the night. It was now May 12th. So she's taking him to the zoo and 2 parks so far, 2 water parks.
Mhm.
On May 13th, they checked out at 10 a.m. This is one of the places where there's a clear photo of Amy and Timothy. I will be posting it. She's waiting in line to check out, and he's holding her hand. They're relaxed, wearing comfortable clothes. Later that day, May 13th, Amy called her mother, then her brother-in-law. She told them she just needed some space, that they were safe and not to worry. To James's brother, she said, Timothy is mine. She made a point of saying he's mine. Cell phone records showed that these calls, which were made between noon and 1:30, had come from an area off Route 40, northwest of Sterling, Illinois. The general area was very rural with a lot of farmland. They know Timothy was fine at this point because one of the family members she called said he spoke in the background saying he was hungry, and one of them also spoke to him on the phone where they had a normal conversation. He wasn't upset. He was having a great time. At this point, she shut off the phone and never used it again, discarding it. At no point had she called her husband back. They had traveled at this point around 500 miles. Police were able to examine toll records, finding Amy had visited Sterling or the surrounding area twice within the last few months, which would seem to indicate she was already planning whatever she was going to do ahead of time. No one is aware of anyone she knew in the area. There's a gap here of about 6 hours where their whereabouts are unknown. The next time anyone is aware of her location is in Winnebago, Illinois, at a Family Dollar at 7:25 p.m. She walked in alone to purchase paper, envelopes, and pens. At 8 p.m., she purchased Ritz crackers and milk at Sullivan's food store in the same city. In both of these stores, she was alone. No Timothy. There's another gap, and then at 11:15 p.m., she checked into the Rockford Inn where she would be found dead the next morning. And again, she checked in alone. When I mapped the distance from Winnebago to Rockford, the 2 towns are only about 9 miles apart, so I don't know what she was doing for those 3 hours. The paper, pens, and envelopes she purchased weren't just for suicide note. A few days after her death, her mother and a friend received letters from the dead woman. She wrote in one of them that she didn't feel she belonged in the world. Quote, and I felt for a long time that I belonged with Timothy, but in the end, that wasn't even enough, and I need to go. In 2013, a woman turned in Amy's cell phone. She had found it in 2011 on the side of the road and taken it home, putting it on a shelf in her home. Her brother ended up needing a new phone, and she remembered the one she'd found, handing it over to him. When he charged it and turned it on, there was a contact list, and he actually recognized some of the names in her phone from the news stories. Sadly, there was no information on the phone that led them to anything concerning Timothy's location. Police had also scoured her computers and home phone records, but found nothing that told them what had happened to the boy. So whatever she'd been doing, she hadn't done it there. And I think they also went through her work computer and stuff. So she was smart enough to be doing this somewhere else, maybe a library, who knows. Police thought it was reassuring that the backpack, clothes, and toys were never found. They hoped it meant he truly hadn't been murdered, but had instead gone to a new family with all of the items. In 2015, a woman in Florida called police in response to a news story about Timothy that showed an age progression photo put together by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children and said there was a boy in the neighborhood who had moved there right after Timothy's disappearance. She said he was homeschooled and the family, when they'd moved in, had Midwestern license plates. While it was agreed the neighborhood boy looked an awful lot like Timothy, should look at that time, tests showed it wasn't him. April 3rd, 2019, a distraught teenage boy was found in Newport, Kentucky. He said he was Timothy Pitzen and that he'd been held captive all this time by a couple who had sexually assaulted him and that he just escaped them. DNA testing showed it wasn't him. An investigation showed it was a 23-year-old man named Brian Michael Reaney who had gotten out of Belmont Correctional Institute in Ohio within the last month. His brother said he had Asperger's and bipolar disorder. When called on the Cokes, Brian said he'd seen Timothy's story on 2020 and had become fascinated by the case and that he had wanted to escape his own family, so thought this was the best way to do it. He got 2 years in prison and 1 year probation for perpetrating the hoax. Strikingly, Amy's family have supported James throughout this. They feel that what Amy did is horrible, that she robbed not only James but them in taking in Timothy away from the family. No one believes she killed him, even James, but they don't understand why the little boy never called 911 or how, as a 19-year-old, he hasn't seen a story about him and contacted someone. James said they'd worked hard to train him to call 911 and to learn his parents' phone numbers. He had an identikit with his photo and thumbprint that the couple had put together for him, but it was found on Amy after her suicide, so she didn't even pass that along. The family are also puzzled at how the people who'd taken Timothy, if that is what happened, hadn't seen the news stories about him and contacted authorities. They wonder what she could have told them that would make them think it's safer to keep him a secret all these years later. While James has moved to Iowa since his son's disappearance, he still has a lot of his belongings, and Timothy's photos and drawings still hang on his walls. In the beginning, he was so certain they would find his son that he'd finished building a treehouse he'd started for Timothy. Kara Jacobs, Amy's sister, has joined Team Hope, which is a volunteer group made up entirely of people who've experienced a missing child who help other families freshly dealing with missing children. If you have information about Timothy, you can contact the Aurora Police Department, Aurora, Illinois, at 630-256-5516. And my sources for this were Cincinnati.com, CNN, Chicago Tribune, Wikipedia, NBC5 Chicago, The Doe Network, and Yankee Magazine. And yeah, I felt it was interesting to me because she said in her note something about, I don't want him to hurt Timothy because he's mad at me. But nobody ever had heard anything about the father doing anything to him, including her sister and her family members and all of that. And from the sound of it, I don't know. She smacks of having also narcissistic tendencies. That whole, if I can't have him, no one can have him, or I'm going to make sure that you can't have him above all else. So it's just, I think she had further undiagnosed mental health issues.
The second one is one that I've heard of. I have heard that story before. At some point, it's come across my consciousness. I don't know how or where, but you have to wonder, did she kill her own child?
And that's the thing, is that even her husband doesn't think she would have done that. Nobody seems to believe she would have done that. The police think the signs most likely point to him having a new home. But it's interesting that they're markedly, she had stayed someplace grassy and done something. They just don't think that she was the type of person that could do it. But I think I've never heard of a matricide where they said, yeah, I totally could have seen her killing her kids. But then she would have also had to have disposed of the items that she'd bought new for him because she didn't have any of it in his backpack. And they never happened across them, which is doable, of course.
The only thing that would make sense is if she gave the boy to someone that wasn't going to stay in the area.
I was thinking even outside of the States, because in 2011, that's when we get, these things hit national news. So I'm like, did she give him to somebody who was going to take him out of the country right away? Or did she give him to an Amish family or something? Where that's
what I was just going to suggest, was the Amish.
And I'm like, I meant to look. I was like, I didn't have time. I ran out of time. But I thought about researching and seeing if there were any populations similar to that in the Sterling, Illinois area, right? So, but even then, they go into town. And there would have been probably posters posted, that sort of thing. So
don't you still have to have a social security number, even if you're Amish?
Is that, yeah, I think so. So
no, you have to.
And don't you have to have,
it's a home birth. If it's a home birth, why would you have a social security number?
Home births do, though.
They do, yeah. You don't have a birth certificate.
You still have to file for a birth certificate and all of that after you have a home birth. I know this because I was an administrator on a mom's board, and a lot of them did home births.
So no, but I know that you would do that in a more connected population. But I'm just saying, I don't know if the Amish do they apply for the social security number?
Are they a sovereign nation?
They are not. I would think
even sovereign nations get like tribal folks. Get social security.
You get tribal ID if you're on the res, but you still have to get
tribal ID, but I think you also get social security.
Yeah, because you can. I mean, if you can get arrested, you have to have a social security number.
Yeah. Basically. So yeah, I don't.
So
you are supposed to, I think, in general.
Well, you're supposed to.
But don't. People who were born in cults and stuff often have to get that stuff after the fact or not have it.
Right. And I am not saying that the Amish are a cult.
No, but that's the example I know of where I know people people who've been in a cult who had to then jump through those hoops. I know somebody who had her children while in the cult and they didn't have those things.
So what we need is a hotline to, well, who is that author who writes the Amish romance?
Oh, is it Beverly?
Beverly Lewis?
Yeah.
Because we met her. We went to that luncheon and met her. She's a lovely person. Fascinating stories. But I'm like, I wonder if she would know. We should Google it. I mean, now I'm like, do the Amish have social security numbers?
Now we have that mystery to solve.
Because what would they use it for?
Getting arrested.
Getting arrested.
No.
You can be arrested and not have one.
If you can go like I forget what it's the year that you have the Wander year.
Mm-hmm.
If you're Amish,
Rumspringa.
If you can leave the Amish community and interact with the outside world at all, you have to have a social security number. Like, are you going to get a job? What about applying for apartments? What about your driver's license?
Citizen, so
if you don't have a social, it's not a fair test of whether you really want to be Amish if there's no way for you to integrate in the outside world. So
true.
You would hear about that. So I'm saying we don't hear about that. So probably they have social security numbers.
And again, they do business with the regular world. And I feel like if you're doing business with, you're having to do tax stuff and all of that.
Yeah.
And you have to have security for that.
True.
So I can see where a cult, you'd be like, we're going to just hide everybody's identity and like shuffle people around. And we're going to have 8 kids and 3 numbers.
A lot of them don't even get to leave whatever that compound or whatever is, right? That's the thing, is full control of these people. And a lot of them give up their belongings and all of that stuff to go there and turn all their money over to the cult. It's good. Yeah. It's a good job if you can get it.
So she could have given the child to someone in a cult, or I don't know. I'm thinking the Amish are a good bet still, because you could say this child came to us from my cousin in Arizona and has never been on the books. We don't have a social security number for him. What do I have to do to get him one?
Right. So if she had found somebody, or again, if they were leaving the country, then it's a moot point. Although she
they left the country
out of the country, so they would have had to have a fake passport for him.
Or maybe she gave him to the carnies, the circus folk.
We went to the Showman's Museum in Sarasota, and it's wonderful. And it's all about carnies and sideshows. And we talked to a guy. He
wanted so badly to talk to somebody.
He was awesome. He was telling us stories about the 8'8" giant that lived in town and got drunk and died in a ditch somewhere during.
Yes, because there was a cold spell. What they call him? The Viking. The Viking giant.
Yeah.
The Viking giant did not wear pants either.
The mayor of it was Gibson. It wasn't Sarasota. But
yes,
like the mayor was a midget for a while, and
the mayor was the giant, and the chief of police was the midget.
Oh, right. How can I forget?
And then he had this old pipe organ that he wanted to play for us because he just bought it and brought it to the museum. So he gets it all set up and he starts it playing, and he's like, "What's the song?"
Wait. And it's a paper roll in there. So you can see the little dots moving by and the thing's turning and it's starting to make music.
Oh my God, there's so many moving parts on this machine, and it's not very big. It's a cart, but it's not huge.
It was meant to go on the inside of a merry-go-round.
Yes.
Or merry-go-round?
Yes.
Okay. The one with little horses.
And he's looking at us because he's waiting for us to twig to what the song is. And then all of a sudden, it gets far enough when we look at each other. It was 9 to 5.
Oh, nice.
To make a living. Barely getting by.
That makes me wonder how you get those little papers with the dots. Like I guess you just commission it from somebody, or I don't feel like
yes.
I could actually look it up in a minute, but he gave us the name of the town where they make this thing. It's somewhere in New York.
And you generally get a roll with 3 songs on it. So you don't have to start it over and rewind it and play the same song over and over and over again. You want it. I think you can even get more songs on it, but he said you get at least 3. So it goes all the way through.
All right. things you learned.
Yes, he said there were some songs that he just kind of got sick of, and there's one that went you.
Yeah, and I was like, he's like, you know that song, and I'm like, I don't believe I do, sir. I'm terribly sorry, but no.
Okay, the Al Herschel Museum in New York is where they are.
Why have I heard of? I guess I've heard of Al Herschel.
I haven't.
For some weird reason, I've heard of Al Herschel.
Okay. Well, there's a museum in New York.
Coming soon to a podcast near you, the Al Herschel story. Yes, so I would imagine you could easily get someone around different parts of the country if they were with a traveling carnival or circus or whatever.
Yeah,
perhaps.
When crossing a border, say from New York into Canada or whatever, is there an age below which child does not have to have identification or a passport?
I don't know, because when I lived up there, I didn't need a passport. All you needed was any form of ID. If you were driving, you just needed your license.
So if she gave him to somebody in Canada, he was 6. He might not have had to have a passport. Or
that's true. That's very true.
I think both of these boys were just little blonde, blue-eyed boys. That's pretty easy. Like, nothing is going to draw the eye when you're taking him over the border.
Obviously it's planned ahead of time. She could have had an ID for him by that point.
Right. So
and when you're thinking about not drawing the eye, he had toys, he had clothes, he had his backpack of stuff. So it wasn't like, here's this random kid in the middle of a car of adults with no kid stuff. He had all the kid stuff.
Right. So a little different if they'd been going over the border into Mexico with somebody darker complected, but that's not where they were. They were up in Illinois. So I feel like that's not that far to just keep going up north, straight up, up through Wisconsin, go up. So yeah, I just found that one compelling because I'm like, his mom basically kidnapped him out to somebody. She outsourced her kidnapping.
Best case, yes.
I choose to believe he's living in Canada.
Yeah.
I like the circus theory better.
Well, that was more fun, but
that was fun.
Right.
And also it got your vacation stuff in, so that's good. Yes.
I go back to, she smacks of having undiagnosed borderline personality disorder with narcissistic tendencies, and they're the ones who are willing to harm their kids. And she'd actually had previous self-harm, but self-harm doesn't indicate harming anybody else in any way before. Right. So yeah, I don't know. But now it is DeAnna's turn.
Wait, I have one more question for that.
Okay.
It's not really a question, but it's a point. If she did harm her child, and then she killed herself, why separate the two events?
Right, because
usually if it's a murder-suicide, you just wipe everybody out in the same place. There's only one location to mess. You're together until the end. And she was like, he is mine.
Right. So you'd think that she wouldn't have left him somewhere. I feel like I have one thing that sets a precedent, right? Like that it could happen differently, but I can't. It's not coming to my brain. Like it's itching at the back of my brain where like a parent did that and put them somewhere. But usually if they did that, it would be in a protective way. You know what I mean? Like you see with somebody who murders somebody they know and we'll say in quotes cares about type thing where there's care taken. Yeah. And also they didn't think she'd gone far off of the highway even when she was on the grassy area. So she hadn't gone anywhere that they could trace while she still had her phone that wasn't just along highways the whole time. So somebody would have certainly found something, you know, she didn't have there was no shovel in her car. There was no,
right.
They thought they might've been near a body of water. A lot of bodies turn up that get thrown into bodies of water. And how strong was she? I don't know. So
and
yeah, I'm inclined to believe she didn't kill him.
Places, so
yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I couldn't say whether she did or not. I'm just like, well, if she killed him, why not together?
Right.
That's true.
And also she left an apology in her suicide note for the mess that the maid was going to have to clean up. So I feel like that state of mind wasn't There was
Huh.
one person she wanted to hurt. She didn't think through how she was hurting the rest of her family. So
Yeah.
it doesn't seem like just all of that together doesn't smack of her killing him to me.
Mm-mm.
Like, not right, but we'll hope.
Yeah. Right. So there's just some random family that has him, and she must have said that terrible things were happening for them to believe that it's better for him not to go back to family.
And maybe they were. You never know.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Your turn.
It's my turn. I'm not much for axe murders. You guys got that covered. I just wanted to say that. Like, we discussed this before, but I wanted to say it. I'm just like, oh, I get to say that in public. That sounds so fun.
I'm not big on the axe
I'm
murder.
not really big. Like, oh, yeah, back in the day, there were axes and murders. And so there were axe murders. Yes, I know. And my special interest in this, in the whole crime thing, is always going to be con artists. So I actually have an upbeat tale that ends horribly and ironically, but hey, or at least I feel it's horrible and ironic, but that's just me.
Well, we'll be the judges.
I'll be the judge of my own irony. Thank you. Okay, so we're doing Victor Lustig today, who's a famous con artist, one of the most famous ones. He was born. Okay, let me caveat what I'm saying here. Everything I'm about to tell you may or may not be true, because there are likely 3 or 4 different versions of almost everything that I'm about to tell you that isn't involving the legal system and the legal system records. Those we're pretty sure of. And we have, there was documentation by his one daughter that we know of what he was like, the things that he said, things that she remembered from him and her mom. So we have documentation, but how much of it is true for his backstory? It's sketchy at best. So I'm going to start with the end of the story, with the very, very end of the story, which happened in 2015. A researcher who was interested in the Victor Lustig story went to his supposed hometown of Hostien in what is now Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic. I'm probably going to get that wrong. It's changed in my lifetime, you know. But the researcher went there to try to find any trace of Victor Lustig under that name or any other, and was unable to do so. So there's no proof that this guy ever was born anywhere near where he said he was born, under any of the many stories that he told or that other people told about him. So we don't know. It could be an alien. Probably not, though. But hey. Okay, so he was born in 1890 in what was then Austria-Hungary, because back then it was still the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and in a town called Hostien, and it's in the Bohemian region, and I'm part Bohemian, which is what got me hooked on it in the first place. And he was either the child of the town's mayor, or the child of extremely poor parents, or the child of middle-class parents. We're not sure. Nobody's sure. We have no evidence. But he told multiple stories, just depending on what anybody wanted to hear at any given time. However, he did visit the town with his wife at one point to meet his father. And she said that she met his father and told her daughter that she had met his father. So he apparently had a father at some point. And they met him. So it wasn't completely fabricated. Or maybe it was. Who knows? It might not have been his father at all. He also had an older brother named Emil. Maybe. He had someone who claimed to be his older brother named Emil, who was a small-time crook and who sometimes helped Victor with his own cons. Victor was skilled in panhandling, pickpocketing, card tricks, burgling, and street hustling while he was still in his hometown. He left in 1908. By then, he was in Prague. We're not sure how he got there, but he was in Prague. And he was arrested for theft and spent 2 months in prison. Okay. You're like, wait for it. The next year, he was supposed to be going to school in Paris. And to me, that says Probably not poor parents.
Right.
Right. But he was extremely smart. So maybe he got a scholarship. We don't know.
Or a patron.
He he went there to become a lawyer, and so did not. I read a couple of shorter books to sort through the information here because there's a lot of information, and trying to get a straight timeline out of anybody is just impossible. But one of my favorite quotes from one of the books is while he was in Paris, he took a postgraduate course in bridge, poker, and female anatomy.
That was one course or 3?
One, apparently.
Bridge, poker, and female anatomy.
Yeah. He was doing a lot of gambling at the time.
Those two I can connect. It's the female anatomy that I'm like.
No. Wait.
Okay.
He also gambled with his life with the female anatomy part, right?
Okay.
While flirting with the girlfriend of a French sailor in Paris.
Woo, sailors!
He got a long scar from her boyfriend down, the left side of his face, from his temple to his ear.
Okay.
Supposedly with the stem of a wine glass. The sailor was like, "Get your hands off my woman!" Broke the top off of his wine glass and just slashed up his face.
Okay.
And
so we're saying this was a sailor who was drinking wine?
It was in France, okay?
In the 1800s?
In 1909.
Okay, it makes more sense because an American sailor would probably 9 times out of 10 mock a man for not having a beer.
This is France.
You are correct.
Anyway, either that happened or it didn't, because I'm telling you, this is going to come up a bunch, right? Either it happened that way or it didn't. But he also would tell the story whenever he needed to. He'd switch the story entirely. So he got it from a duel of honor in Heidelberg. You're like,
okay.
Yeah. But at any rate, he had a scar, and it was from here to here down the side of his face. And it wasn't like he walked around with like a rubber mask or anything. It was visible his entire life. So keep that in mind for later.
Okay.
Okay. In 1912, he gets caught again. He spends almost the entire year in multiple prisons in Vienna, Prague, and Zurich. He gets arrested 3 times and spends most of an entire year in 3 different prisons. So it's not like he's so brilliant that he never gets arrested. After he gets out, it's 1913, and this is sort of a pattern that repeats. He sees something in the news and he goes nuts over it. Okay. This is another wait for it. And 1912 was the sinking of the Titanic. 1913, he starts riding back and forth across the transatlantic on the same type of cruise ships and running cons on them because he saw in news about the Titanic and went, holy shit. Everyone else is going, what a tragedy, or, the end of luxury as we know it, the end of an era. And he's like,
captive audience.
No. There's no telegram. Like, you can't, in 1912, you can't talk to anybody when you're on a cruise ship.
True.
It's not like they're like, here, have a free telegram off the ship. There were transatlantic cables, but you couldn't do it on the ship. Right. And you were limited to line of sight for even distress calls. So he takes the story of the Titanic, and his takeaway point is, they couldn't talk to anybody for quite some time there. So he starts doing con jobs back and forth on the ships. He would get on, pose to be a wealthy nobleman, or not a nobleman. He would pose to be wealthy at that point, but he wasn't a nobleman. And he would get on and find somebody who was a sucker, and he would target people who were willing to lie, cheat, and steal to get an edge up. So he told people he was like the Robin Hood of con artists. So this is like the first guy that started saying.
So if they were honest, they wouldn't go along with his. Okay.
Yes, this is another repeating pattern. If you're willing to try and con somebody else, you're vulnerable to being conned.
Okay.
I mean, you can get conned whether or not you con someone else, but he was like, these people are my sweet spot. He was very jealous of them. And so he kind of just wanted to destroy it.
Okay.
So he would get on these boats and he'd be like, I'm financing a Broadway show. And he would talk it up and he would be like, and, you know, we only need this much more money and you can invest in it. But I want a cut of whatever you invest because I'm giving you this opportunity to invest in a Broadway show. Not everybody gets to do that. You're going to get a bigger cut. I'm going to get an even bigger cut than you are. So he would make it, he would spin it so that the other person who was getting in on the deal would go like, you are such a ripoff, but I'm going to ride your coattails, right? So they would think that they were taking advantage of Victor Lustig, and Victor Lustig would just walk off with cash. He would get to the other end, head off the ship for Broadway, and like take a train to St. Louis and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Or he'd get back on a different ship and go
headed the other direction.
Yeah, but he would separate himself right away from the ship so that he couldn't be tracked down easily. And let's see. And he like here while he was on the ships, he met a guy. Where's that guy's name? Nicky Arnstein. He was another famous con artist. He was married to the actress Fanny Brice for a while, and he's the guy from Funny Girl the musical Funny Girl. He's the con artist that is the center of that story.
Okay,
so that was his friend, and his friend was like, Victor, you really have an aristocratic air. Why aren't you pretending to be a count? Why? I mean, you have this accent. You're very reserved. You're very dignified. You can speak 5 languages. You have really expensive tastes. You're quick on the uptake. You actually just sit down and educate yourself. Every time there was a book in hand, this guy had his nose in the book and reading something different. So he knew just everything. And so this was right after, like within a couple of years after the Arsène Lupin series came out. And I don't know if I wrote down what the guy's name was. Nope, I didn't write it down. Dang it. But the first, like the fictional thief, Arsène Lupin, was famous in France. So famous that he got his own set of short stories specifically about him versus Sherlock Holmes.
Oh.
And they would have it off in these series of short stories.
Okay.
Because it was France and the copyright laws couldn't quite catch up fast enough. And they changed the names just a little bit. So it'd be like Herlock Sholmes and stuff. Right. So about the time that Victor Lustig is looking to build himself an identity and a style, along comes this friend of his who's running cons on a steamship back and forth across the Atlantic going, hey, you're kind of an aristocratic son of a bitch already. Why not act just like the fictional character? And you don't get to see the list of rules that he makes up for himself until later. But he has a list of 10 rules of being that type of con artist that say, like, don't drink. Don't start off talking about sex, but don't back down if somebody else wants to talk about sex. Don't curse. Always be kind to ladies, things like that. I've got the whole list, and I think you can post it. I'll give it to you so you can post the list of rules for con artists later. But he just absorbed the character of being a gentleman thief, and I can't find any documentation for sure that said he was copying Lupin, but it would have been a common knowledge at that time anyway. So World War I happens, and suddenly it's harder to con people into financing Broadway shows while they're crossing the Atlantic on cruise ships because the Germans are kind of sinking them all the time. So he's like, the hell with that. And he actually, as far as I can tell, they don't know a lot about him for sure. And this is even less sure than other things that they don't know for sure, but they think he was working with a German gambling syndicate in Germany during World War I, who he then conned and had to flee at the last minute in 1918 as World War I was wrapping up. He ripped them all off and fled. And it was about here that his character gelled, and he started consistently calling himself Count Victor Lustig instead of just Victor Lustig. And the story there goes, in 1918, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire was broken up by the end of World War I, right?
Mm-hmm.
The soon-to-form Czech Republic was formed out of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So all of the previous titles of the King of Bohemia and all of that former court, which were kind of like defunct, but still sort of honorarily existent under Austro-Hungarian, dissolved. So it was right at that moment that he really could have been a Bohemian count,
right,
on the run after World War I. He probably wasn't, but we're not sure. And then, so I don't know how much time do I have, because I can talk all.
Oh, you have. What time?
Okay. 1919, he meets the love of his life. Her name is Roberta Noret. They have one child that we know of, and her name is Betty Jean, and she passes down a lot of lore about both of them later on. The thing about his wife, Roberta, is she was the love of his life. She was the only person to stay consistently faithful to him in her own way throughout his lifetime. She also tried to run him over with their daughter in the back seat. He cheated on her all the time, and
what a shock.
She left him at one point, married somebody else, this was a mistake, went to go back to him, saw him with the other woman that he was currently cheating on her with, and tried to run him over with the car. And the little girl was, I think, 3 or 4 at the time, and she goes, "Oh, that's Daddy. What's Daddy doing?" "Oh, we're just playing a game of tag," is what she told her daughter.
We're playing tag, and I'm using the car.
But oddly, when she was a teenager, she had a very strange version of tag she played with the other children.
Yeah, okay. I don't know anything about that, but I wouldn't be surprised. Let's see. And then right after that, Prohibition started. And he might have conned Al Capone, but maybe not. He didn't actually, if the story is true, he didn't actually con Al Capone. He borrowed $50,000 for a very short amount of time, for like a week and a half, and didn't do anything with it, and then gave it back. And Al Capone supposedly said, "Okay, well, you're such an honest guy. Here's $5,000 for free." I think he was running a different con that he didn't get caught on, where he borrowed money from Al Capone and was seen to borrow money from Al Capone so he could cheat somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gave the original money back because he's like, who steals from Al Capone? This is dumb.
Right.
But who knows? Maybe that's a lie. And then I'm going to skip that one because I'm... oh, maybe not. Okay. It's like everything that I could tell you, it just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, right? He managed to get a hold of some bonds, some Liberty bonds. Do either of you know what those are?
I've heard of them.
So World War I, they wanted to finance the war. So they had these thing called Liberty bonds, but they wouldn't pay off for 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So until the 10-year window was up, you couldn't cash them in for real money, but people treated them as if they were cash. They just swapped them back and forth.
Okay. I was going to say they're like savings bonds today.
Yeah.
Kind of.
But it was a 10-year lock-in for everybody. Mm-hmm. And so Lustig shows up to buy some land with Liberty bonds. And he has $22,000 in Liberty bonds for a $12,000 piece of property that's not really worth $12,000. It's really worth like $6,000.
Okay.
But he's willing to, he wants the land. So he puts down the $22,000, says, "I want $10,000 back in cash." The bankers are like, we're going to rip this guy off. He doesn't realize the land isn't worth $12,000. So they make the switch, And something happens, and one of them leaves the room for like 30 seconds. He swaps out envelopes. So now he has both the bonds and the cash, walks out of there, goes to Chicago. This is from like Missouri or something where he starts out. He goes to Chicago to spend the money because he's always spending freaking money. And the investigators track him down in Chicago. He's like, because this is before Black Friday 1929. This is in 1922. There's no FDIC. There's no insurance. And there's no way to stop a run on a bank. So the investigators track him down. They say, give us the money back, you son of a bitch. And he's like, I'll go to the newspapers and tell them exactly how you got fooled. And you're going to get a run on your bank because you're a bunch of fools. And not only that, but talking to you has cost me a certain amount of time. So you're going to have to give me another $1,000 to keep my mouth shut. So not only did he get caught, he got away with it, got away with more than he said he was going to, because he had that 30 seconds to switch envelopes, and he made them pay for the privilege of confronting him and tracking him down.
Wow.
And I you guys do mostly murder, so you don't really track this, but yes, he did actually run the wire at one point. So like the con from The Sting, he ran exactly the same thing on a couple of people.
I don't remember what it is.
If you know The Sting, then you'll know this. I'm not going to go through it because it's difficult to explain, but it relies on there's a 90-second window between one thing and the next. And if you're dishonest,
yes,
you take advantage of that 90-second window to bet on horses. But if you're honest, you're like, no, that could never work, right? So you walk away. But his crowning achievement was selling the Eiffel Tower. Not once, but twice. So this is like, what? And it makes perfect sense when you get the information of how he actually did it.
And he's not even French.
But he speaks French.
Okay.
Because he speaks.
Of course he does.
German, French, English, Austrian. No, that's German. He speaks one other language I don't know.
Belgian.
Does he speak Czech or Slovakian?
Yeah, he speaks Czech too, obviously, but he speaks 5 different languages, and English is not his best language. So yeah, he speaks French.
So this guy wasn't stupid. Basically.
What?
In general, this guy was not stupid. He was quite bright and
freaking brilliant.
People should be glad he was con artists for the most part.
Right. Okay, so Eiffel Tower built in 1887 as an entrance for the 1889 Paris World's Fair. It was widely hated at the time. It was never supposed to stand past that. It was like the Olympic Stadium and stuff, where you're like, well, we built it for this big thing. It's a tourist thing. Great. When it wears out, it's kind of awkward. Ha ha ha. We meant to keep it up and we didn't. Right. By the 1920s, the structure was rusting and visibly teetering. And officials were struggling to raise funds for any kind of renovation or repairs. And Victor Lustig read about this in the newspaper and said, you know what? So he commissioned a counterfeiter to make government stationery and IDs for the Deputy Director General of the Ministère de Poste et Télégraphes, and recruited the top 5 or 6 metal salvaging companies in Paris. So he wined and dined these 6 guys, drove them around Paris in a limousine. There were limousines in 1925. Incidentally, I looked at a couple. I'm like, yep, that's a limousine. And they took a tour of the tower and ran into a construction crew complaining about how decrepit the tower was there. And but he flashed them his fake ID and said, "We need it. We are here for the private tour." And they're like, "What private tour?" And he's like, "If you embarrass me, I will have your heads." Threatened them. And so they gave him a private tour. And then he took him to the most expensive hotel in Paris.
Of course.
The Hotel de Crillon, for a sales pitch. And it was 7,000 tons of steel. And they were auctioning off scrap, the rights to have that scrap. And so Lustig on this whole tour, he's not looking for the highest bid. He's looking for the most impressionable bidder.
Oh.
Yeah. So he figures out who the guy is that he wants to scam, tells that guy that he has the best bid. But that the only way he, dear sir, the only way he's going to allow this bid to go through the way it legally should is if he gets a cut of the bid.
Of course. Of course.
And up to this point, the guy's wife had heard about this and is like, no, this is shady. I've not heard anything. And as soon as they found out that Lustig wanted a cut of the action, they were like, oh my God, it must be real, because Paris officials are corrupt. That's just how it is. So it must be true. They just didn't realize how corrupt it was. So the amount that this guy, Poisson, gave Lustig is not clear. It varies from 20,000 francs to 250,000 francs. And the additional the commission was either 50,000 francs, which is higher than the first bid that I gave you, to 70,000 francs. So the corrupt official cut of the pie is huge. Mm-hmm. But we're pretty sure at a minimum, he walked away with about $1 million in US dollars.
Wow.
So Lustig and his partner flee to Austria, and they wait for the news to blow up about the swindle, and it doesn't, so they do it again. The second time, somebody goes to the cops, and it's all over the news. But they waited 6 months for something to come out after the first time, and nothing happened. They just got another 6 guys and did it all over again. Okay.
That's ballsy.
That's ballsy. The year after that, he comes up with there's this little kid magic trick where you stick $1 in a box and then like $2 come out, and it's like, oh, the dollar reproduction machine.
Mm-hmm.
Lustig wasn't the first guy to come up with it, but he did it the best, apparently. Where he had it set up where you'd stick in this $100 bill and you'd put it in the box, wait 6 hours, and they would go off and do something else. Somebody would come in, take out the genuine dollar, quickly take another dollar, destroy all the serial number on it, recopy the serial number from the original dollar, adjust it, because they had a professional counterfeiter doing this, adjust the copied dollar so that they would have
mm-hmm.
It looks like a copy of the dollar you just fed it, and they'd close back up the box. And so usually this would be like $10,000 to $25,000 they would rip off every time. Well, at one point, Lustig gets arrested for something else completely different. And it's
speeding. Jaywalking.
In the book, it was unrelated fraud. He gets to talking to the local sheriff, and the sheriff, he twigs to what the sheriff is bragging up about all the women he's visited in New Orleans. And he goes like, so how much have you been skimming off the top at the police, mm-hmm. of the county accounts? And the guy's like, damn it, I've been caught. And he thinks that Lustig knows the whole story. Lustig is just like sniffing out dishonesty wherever he goes. And so Lustig sells him one of these Romanian boxes to copy the dollars. The guy gives him, I think it's like $15,000. The sheriff gives him $15,000 after arresting a guy on unrelated fraud. No, it gets better. He gives him $15,000. He gives him $15,000 and his freedom. Lustig hightails it off somewhere else.
Of course.
The sheriff spends 18 months tracking him down to confront him with the injustice of what he has done. Lustig goes, your box is fucking broken, dude. Fixes it and plays him again.
Oh, God.
He doesn't charge him any extra this time. He's just like, well, you already paid me for it. So just let me go. And the sheriff's like, okay.
Oh my God.
By this time, though, letting him go the second time was a mistake, because he had used counterfeit dollars
of course,
to replace on this second run of this box. he didn't use a real dollar bill to transfer the serial number to the way he had been doing. He used counterfeit dollar bills or $100 bills because that he was now working with another guy to counterfeit. And they were producing $100,000 worth of bills in that money every month. And so what he had on hand was counterfeit money. When the sheriff went to turn this all in, because he got arrested in New Orleans buying buying hookers in New Orleans.
Hookers and blow.
They were like, where did you get this counterfeit money from? And the whole story spilled out. And that's how eventually how they caught him was the second time he fooled the sheriff, it turned out to be a trail that the Secret Service, which deals with counterfeit money, used to track him down. And when they finally caught him, they put him in jail in Manhattan in the Tombs, and he got out.
Of course.
He got out. He had a linen rope made from extra bed sheets. And as he was climbing down, people spotted him and started yelling at him. And he waved back and pretended to wash the windows because he's got linen bed sheets on him. And so they were like, "Hi, mister." And he left. And he was out for a month. They caught him again. And they were like, "The hell with this." And they put him in Alcatraz for the rest of his life.
Wow.
Okay. But his wife that he was divorced from twice now, tried to get him out. She sold all her jewelry and tried to bribe his way out because they weren't taking his complaints about his health seriously. It ended up.
Well, why would they believe anything he said?
He's in Alcatraz. He got sinus infections. He got an abscess at the top of that scar, and it got infected and blew his face up, and he died of an infection. So. That was when he was 47. So if you've lived past 47, you are now older than the guy who sold the Eiffel Tower twice.
Wow.
That was sorry, that was a long explanation, but damn if that isn't a good story.
Wow.
Yeah.
I myself.
And then everybody was gone at 47. So he did all of that for many years.
Wow.
Happy birthday. No. I know it's not your birthday.
Alrighty then. My turn. I've got a good old serial killer, which is not what I usually do. But I was in South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
I was in South Carolina, so I felt like I needed to look up some South Carolina monsters or mayhem or something. Because that's what I do when I travel. I look for the worst thing that ever happened somewhere. Somebody needs to. So outside of the Civil War, I'm looking at South Carolina. So outside of the Civil War and, slavery, I'm like, oh, what did people do in South Carolina? So today I will speak of Donald Henry Gaskins Jr., also known as Donald Henry Parrott Jr., also known as Pee Wee Gaskins. So I'm just going to call him Pee Wee. He was born on March 13th, 1933 in Florence County, South Carolina, which is north of Charleston, inland a bit. It's not a coastal place. To Yulia Parrott. Now, from what I was able to find, he had several older either siblings or half-siblings, none of whom had a father figure in their lives. And Donald was a very small child and was immediately nicknamed Pee Wee. As an adult, he only stood about 5'4" and weighed approximately 130 pounds. Thus the Pee Wee. So early in his life, he was both, the beauty of this, he was both neglected and abused by his mother and other relatives. And his mother may in fact have pimped him out to both her boyfriends and her customers. So despite the hard start that he had, he was often, early on, they described him as a great manipulator and con artist who was street smart and had a keen sense of humor and a friendly, entertaining personality. So he made the most of what he had. If you can't be big and tall and handsome, be funny. So he first dropped out of school around age 11. and formed a gang with Danny and Marsh. That's all I have for their names. They called themselves the Trouble Trio. They committed burglary. They hired prostitutes with their money and possibly molested smaller or younger boys in the neighborhood. So this is 11-year-olds who have formed a gang and are hiring prostitutes. They broke up after they raped Marsh's sister and got caught. Her parents beat them all bloody. Danny and Marsh left the area, but not Pee-wee. He stuck around. When he was 13 years old, he made the mistake of trying to burglarize the home of a girl who knew him. So it took me a little doing to find out what happened here. She caught him and lashed out with the first weapon that came to hand. So what was that weapon?
Was it an axe?
It was an axe. What weapon does everybody have? It was an axe, possibly a hatchet. So at any rate,
I watched a movie last night where she beat somebody up with the toilet cleaner brush.
I would like to see that scene. But they're not very heavy.
They're not very sturdy.
No.
No, it was all she had. She was trapped in the bathroom.
You make the most of what you have. So anyway, he got the axe away from her, struck her in the arm and the head before fleeing. He was caught and sent to reform school. So at least 2 different sources said that at this trial was the first time he heard that his first name was Donald, because he'd been called Pee-wee this whole time. So he thought that was his name. And to me, that's just so sad. But he was sent to the South Carolina Industrial School for White Boys in Florence, South Carolina. That was the name of the place. Okay. He was supposed to remain there until he turned 18. Because of his diminutive stature, he was sexually abused by the older and larger boys. He sought protection from the boss boy in exchange for sexual favors, but eventually, after several attempts, he did escape. So what did he do? He joined a traveling carnival. That must be why it was on my mind. That's where, anyway. So he joined a traveling carnival. He married a 13-year-old girl, but eventually decided to return to reform school and finish out the remainder of his sentence. How bad was his life that he went back to reform school? So at any rate, he was released in 1951 at the age of 18. He worked for a brief time at a tobacco plantation, and it seems like he had honest work for about 10 minutes, and then he got caught up in an insurance scam. He collaborated with local farmers to go in and set their barns on fire, which would allow them to collect the insurance. He had a run-in with a farmer's daughter, struck her in the head with a hammer. He was convicted of assault and attempted murder and sent to jail. Now, his first actual murder that he committed was while he was in prison this time. And I was not able to clarify why he did it. There were 2, both of them are acceptable reasons. It's not clear which one is true. It may have been self-defense that this guy attacked him first. And it may have been a case of, I'm going to take on the meanest motherfucker in the place, because if I beat him up, everybody else will leave me alone. So he killed Hazel Brazel, who was reputedly the most feared man in the prison, and got an extra 3 years on his sentence, plus 6 months of solitary confinement. I'm thinking if you've been abused this much, 6 months of solitary confinement would be a welcome respite.
I take 6 months of solitary right now.
So he escaped from prison in the back of a garbage truck in 1955, fled to Florida, as one does, and joined a traveling carnival again. Some say he wanted to escape because one of his wives filed for divorce. So he was soon caught, taken back to prison, and was paroled in August of 1961. So when he got out, he didn't learn a damn thing, and he went right back to committing burglaries and fencing stolen property. For a while, this just kills me. He worked as a driver and general assistant to a traveling minister.
Ooh, fun.
Yeah, but that gave him, first of all, you've got this practically unimpeachable reference to vouch for you. But also because this guy traveled, he was able to go to different towns and access different people's houses with his boss that he could go back later and rob. So in 1963, he was arrested in Georgia for the rape of a 12-year-old girl, although he stole a car and escaped to North Carolina, where he married a 17-year-old girl. She eventually turned him in, and he went back to prison for 8 years. He was paroled in November of 1968 and moved to Sumter, South Carolina, where he worked for a roofing company. So it appears that he did have a little bit of real work for a while. But just think of that next time you're getting a bid on your roof, as we do in Colorado every couple of years.
Not if you get the hurricane tiles like we did.
Oh, we got some.
One good time, and then we were like, that's it. We're going all in.
We got extra heavy duty shingles last time we did it too. So later on in life, Pee Wee described the feelings that led to his actions as them aggravated and bothersome feelings. So in September of 1969, he found a new way to release those feelings. He picked up a young female hitchhiker, then became enraged when she laughed at his sexual advances. He beat her unconscious, raped and tortured her, took her to the swamp, where his plan was to bind her, weigh her body down, and throw her in the swamp where she would drown. So he wasn't disposing of the body. He actually wanted to inflict that much torture on her while he was killing her. He later admitted that the power trip was what got him, the feeling that he could do anything he wanted to her. That was his motive after this. He developed his methods of torture, often keeping his victim alive for several days. He picked up male and female victims, although female did seem to be his preference. And so this is really kind of graphic and disgusting. He would occasionally cannibalize his victims, sometimes making them watch him eat and sometimes forcing them to join him. What an all-around great guy. Although he claimed to have taken the lives of hundreds of victims, his incarcerated killing and the victims I'm about to talk about are the only ones that have been confirmed. So after he was in prison, of course, people wanted to write books about him. And oh, yes, he killed hundreds of people. So in 1970, he killed people he knew or were related to. He killed his niece, 15-year-old Janice Kirby, and her 17-year-old friend Patricia Ann Alsbrook in Sumter, South Carolina. He beat both of them to death, claiming he was upset about their alleged drug use. There is no other evidence anywhere that these girls were involved with drugs, but that's what he said. He was upset they were using drugs, so he beat them to death. Other accounts say he tried to sexually assault the girls and they laughed at him. I know which one I find more convincing, but I don't think he gave a shit about anyone's vices. In 1971 or 72, he claimed to have poisoned 20-year-old Martha Ann Dix Jr., who went by the name Clyde. So there were a couple of reasons he might have done so. Although Clyde generally stuck to dating women, she was known to mess around, that was the phrase they used, with men occasionally, and there was a rumor that Pee Wee was the father of her unborn child. Or she was the drug dealer who supplied his niece and her friend. Or she dumped him so she could move to Texas and marry her girlfriend. So he did tell them where the body was. Her bones were it was sometime after the fact. Her bones were found in a ditch, but when the bones were being sent to a university for study to verify, and the bones somehow got lost. I mean, shit happens. In 1973, Pee Wee's racist tendencies came out. He had befriended 22-year-old Doreen Hope Dempsey several years earlier, which, do the math, that's super creepy. He's older. She's, a teenager. She and her 2-year-old daughter, Robin Michelle Dempsey, were staying with two of Pee Wee's friends, brothers Johnny and Carl Sellers, in North Charleston. Pee Wee heard that she was pregnant with her second biracial child, so he had the brothers bring the mother and daughter and drop them off at his house, which had a pond in the backyard, which is where he drowned them both. Another version of this story contends that he told Doreen, he was going to take her to the bus station, then took her and the child into the woods where he raped and murdered them, after which he buried them together. So whatever his exact motivation was, he was guilty of those two. In June of 1974, he killed his old pal, 36-year-old Johnny Sellers, who we just talked about. He was just doing crimes with, after Sellers asked for his share of the money from the sale of a stolen boat. He also killed Sellers' ex-girlfriend, Jessie Ruth Judy, because she could link the two men and had a lot of knowledge about Pee Wee's criminal activities. So in 1975, if you can believe it, shit gets wild in 1975 because it's been not wild so far. So in February, Suzanne Kipper Owens and her husband, John Owens, paid Pee Wee $1,500 to murder her ex-boyfriend, Silas Barnwell Yates. Pee Wee used Diane Bellamy Neely, whose estranged husband, Walter, was a friend of Pee Wee's, to lure Yates out of the house with a story about her car breaking down. So Pee Wee shows up, kidnaps and murders Yates in the presence of John Owens and John Powell, who helped him bury the body. So then, and these names, you're like, wait, you're saying the same names. Yes, it was an incestuous little group, and he just fucking killed half of it. Diane Neely and her boyfriend, Avery Leroy Howard, thought, why they thought this, I can't figure out. They thought it would be a swell idea to blackmail Pee Wee. Since they knew so much about his criminal activities, I'm like, have you not noticed him killing people? Have you not noticed the people who work with him are all dead? Diane also threatened to tell authorities that Pee Wee was allowing underage teens to have sex in his home. So on April 10th, he stabbed Diane Neely to death and then shot Avery Howard. Somewhere in this timeline, I couldn't get the exact date, Pee Wee also kidnapped, raped, and killed a 13-year-old girl named Kim Gelkins. He may have also let other men abuse her while she was in his custody, while she was being held. So on October 10th, it was the turn of the two half-brothers, 27-year-old Dennis Bellamy and 15-year-old John Henry Knight, who were Diane Bellamy Neely's half-brothers. You need a scorecard. It's like fucking
a family tree.
Who's the Southern author who has the big complicated family trees? William Faulkner. You need a fucking family tree to figure out who's doing what to who. So the oldest brother, Dennis, had done business with Pee Wee and provided him with stolen guns that Pee Wee never paid him for. So Dennis went to Pee Wee's house and confronted him. And Pee Wee was like, you know what? I wasn't able to sell those guns. I will return them to you. You can take them and do what you want with them. And this is like, sounds good to me. And he goes, come on with me. I hid them in the woods. Really? Would you go? I'm looking at Shannon's face. Would you go in the woods with this guy?
No.
So takes Dennis into the woods and shoots him. Then a little while later, his half-brother John shows up. The 15-year-old shows up looking for him. And Pee Wee goes, he went into the woods to get the guns. I'll take you to him. Takes him shot him too. November 14th. Yes, it's still 1975. November 14th is when the worm turned. Walter Neely, whose estranged wife Pee Wee had killed, I don't know if it was guilt, if he had been charged with another crime, but he fucking confessed everything he knew about Pee Wee Gaskins to the police. He knew where the bodies were buried since Pee Wee used the same plot of ground in the woods to bury most of his victims. And police found even more bodies than Walter Neely knew about. So this little plot in the woods, they go and start digging and and what a dumbass to bury everybody in the same place. But it's in North Charleston. There are rivers. There's other ways to get rid of bodies. We've talked about that plenty.
Yeah. A nice river, really good. Especially if it feeds into the ocean directly.
Exactly. So at the end of May of 1976, Pee Wee was charged and tried on one count of murder, found guilty, and sentenced to death. But the fuckery is just beginning. The sentence was later commuted to life in prison after South Carolina discontinued the death penalty. Please note, and this will be important in a minute, the death penalty was reinstituted in South Carolina in 1978. In September of 1982, Pee Wee killed Rudolph Tyner, who was a death row inmate who had killed an elderly couple while robbing their store. The couple's son reached out to Pee Wee asking what he would need to kill Tyner, since the son's opinion was that the state was taking too long to render justice. Pee Wee replied that he needed $2,000 and some C4 explosives. So,
because that was the easiest way to do
the
it.
son hid them in the heel of a shoe, and Pee Wee was able to obtain a blasting cap, a long wire, and a radio speaker. So he rigged this up so that when he gave Tyner a speaker and said it was a radio speaker and said, pick it up and test it and see if it's working. When he picked up the speaker to test it, Pee Wee detonated the bomb. Pee Wee was tried and sentenced to death for this murder. The first white man in South Carolina convicted for the murder of a black man.
Nice.
Fucking 1982.
Wow.
Welcome to the new century, South Carolina. God, I can never go back there now. While in custody, Pee Wee claimed to have killed 100 to 110 victims, although very little proof was ever found of most of those. He was put to death on September 6, 1991, hours after he tried to kill himself by slitting his wrists. His last words were, "I'll let my lawyers talk for me. I'm ready to go."
Well, they're not getting paid anymore. They're not going to talk for you.
No, they don't do it for free. So my sources were Wikipedia, the True Crime a Day calendar, of course. I still have so many things I saved from that. The Times and Democrat newspaper, Uncovered.com, the Crime Museum, and Investigation and Discovery.
I forgot to give my sources. I have to give my sources.
Okay, give your sources. We want to know that you're legitimate.
Oh, actually, well, these are also recommendations. So,
Well, there you go.
Most of these are books. Handsome Devil by Jeff Maish, which is on Victor Lustig. It's very short. Victor Lustig, The Life and Legacy of the 20th Century's Most Notorious Con Artist. And that's actually by a group of editors, Charles Rivers Editors. For a lot of how the cons worked, I drew on The Big Con, the story of the Confidence Man, David Moore and Luc Sante, famous book on con artistry, actually written by a guy who just wanted to know the slang of con artists. But they were like, hey, we like you. We're just going to tell you all the stuff, rub all the names off and take the identifying information off. You're okay to publish it. We like you.
Okay.
Which is almost a con job in itself.
Mm-hmm.
And a Smithsonian article from 2012, The Smoothest Con Man That Ever Lived by Gilbert King.
Nice.
A bunch of other sources too, but the two books handled it better and in more detail. So we'll stick with that.
I've got to find me some more cryptids. I miss a good cryptid. I miss Sinkhole Sam. That was my favorite in Kansas.
I remember that one.
Yeah.
It was like really early.
It was. But I just haven't been able to find. I think I'm not looking in the right places. But who would have expected a cryptid in Kansas?
Who wouldn't?
I don't know. It just is. It's so flat and dry there. I don't know.
Look, all the cryptids have moved online.
And I haven't yet. I need to get back to West Virginia so I can go see the Mothman statue. That's on my list of things to do.
Yeah, that's a must. It's time for some more paranormal and some more cryptids and stuff like that.
Yeah, some haunted. I do have a book about haunted Charleston. I just haven't had time to get into it. I have at least 2 books on haunted Adirondacks. I have one on haunted Charleston. I haven't bought any haunted Florida because the people who are alive now are scarier than anything. Somebody was asking me about the podcast, and I said, well, it's called Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem. They said, well, what do you talk about? I said, well, we do talk about, we talk about serial killers, and we talk about unsolved crimes. I said, but sometimes we do just odd stuff. I said, I talked about the Great Maple Syrup Heist. And then I said, then there was this story about Waffle House crimes. And that was just the conversation for the rest of the day was what happened at Waffle House? Honey, what didn't happen at Waffle House? So like, yeah, we need to look up. We need to, but serial killers are there's so many.
Yeah, criminals in general are just a lot easier than other things because although sometimes it's the same thing where you start researching some criminal that has the big stories that you've heard, and then it turns out like none of that is real and they did two things and you're like, oh, well, that was a lot of research for something I'm not going to talk about now.
Yes.
But that's the more often than not, that's where the paranormal goes, where you're like, oh, this is great. And then you look into it and there's no backstory. No real backstory, and you can't find proof of anything they've given as backstory, and it's like, damn you. At least make it.
I found a haunted asylum. I don't even remember where it was. And when I opened up the article, it said, well, it's an asylum, so people must have died there, so it must be haunted.
Mm. There's one that I looked up in Wisconsin, I think, that was kind of like that. They were like, yeah, it's not really a haunted asylum, but there were like steam tunnels underneath the ground. And so people just made up stuff about it.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm sorry.
That's a steam tunnel.
That does not make for a good podcast.
I love a good hidden tunnel, room, you name it, any of that stuff.
But there needs to be loot hidden in it, or dead bodies or something. Something needs to be hidden in the room.
It's always disappointing when there's nothing like that. Like, really? Yeah. Really? Fine. I don't want to hear this good story anyway.
There's enough weird things going on in the world. At least use some references when you're making up this Halloween stuff.
Right.
To scare kids. Come on.
Yes. And it's really hard now to find haunted houses, because if you try to Google haunted house, it gives you all the Halloween hell scream kind of the stuff, the for-profit stuff where they're trying to, and I'm like, which is great. I'm glad those exist for people who want to go to them, but I'm like, that's not what I want to write about.
Yeah. And also when algorithms changed, when Google started focusing more on ads and stuff like that, it once again became hard to research a lot of things. And if you're trying to research somebody with a common name, you have to plug in all these other words, but it doesn't let you do. I knew all the tricks and stuff before with where to use quotes and where to use this and that, and then that stopped working.
Yeah, it did. I was very angry because I would type in a name that was like one letter different, and it keeps saying, no, here is the common name. No, that's not the name I typed in, so that's not the name I'm trying to look up.
Yeah. It's such a pain in the ass. Yeah.
Yes.
All right. Well, other than your last book that came out, DeAnna, what was the mystery that came out before that?
The one before that, Your Souffle Must Die. It's a cooking cozy. Nobody actually dies, but bad things happen to food.
That's a crime in and of itself.
It is.
Yes. So there's an adult book and a middle grade book that people can read. And do you have, what is your website so people can get to your stuff?
It's at wonderlandpress.com.
Okay.
And you can find all kinds of stuff there.
That's easy. You did what? See, I keep looking down. I'm like, yeah, I know I didn't get stuff in my name for URL and all of that. And eventually I can keep trying, but it's a pretty common name. The Irish have it all. No. But I had already branded myself under the Warrior Muse. And I was like, I did the branding work here. That was my first mistake, but I got to keep with it.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And I still have my own website. It just forwards over to Wonderland Press unless something is broken mysteriously again, because I haven't checked it last month. But I had so many pen names running that I just didn't want to manage them all. So it's all Wonderland Press. So at least it just is one thing and it goes to one place.
Right.
I couldn't keep up with the branding. So I didn't brand under my own name because at the time I was trying to do different pen names. And now I'm dumping all but the young kids stuff back over to my name. And, I'm working on getting everything organized so I can slowly convert everything back over.
Yeah, that's all. It seems it's the big question because I've pondered doing a pen name for mysteries, and then I'm like, ugh. I go back and forth all the time. I've seen Jeff Strand successfully publish under just his name in multiple genres, but I've seen people where it bites them in the ass because people are like, no, you're a horror author. And so I just put out a new book that's not horror, right? And so it's going to be slow going for a little bit until I build that up.
Okay. I don't know if this is appropriate for the podcast, but it's writer talk. What I'm hearing now is if you are the kind of writer who has a very strong voice and your sensibilities carry from genre to genre, then don't write under a pen name. But if you're looking to min-max current genre, like if you're one of the people who writes to market, more power to you, go for that, but brand yourself under that pen name because you're trying to ride the algorithms for a specific niche. But if you're trying to be like the next Stephen King, not necessarily as big, but you're like, everything I write is just Shannon Lawrence, then just be Shannon Lawrence. And I finally just went for myself. I'm like, anyone who ever picks up anything of mine is going to go, yeah, that's her. So I may as well just kill the pen names because people don't read my books because they're exactly on point. You just go like, yep, that's her. Okay. All right.
Interesting. It's your voice brand.
Yeah. My voice, my extremely analytical, yet wacky point of view is going to run through everything I write. So yeah, the cozy mystery, it's a cozy mystery, but everybody goes completely nuts over this food that they're making. It's insane food. And the middle grade, it's a middle grade, but there's a liminal space in it, and it's horrific. and everybody goes nuts over that. So it's the same voice, it's the same personality. Might as well be me.
Yeah.
Yep.
So tricky. And it's not like I was ever going to keep a pen name secret that it was me. It was just going to be, hi, this is me writing under this, right? So, yeah.
Well, what's her name has balanced that well.
Nora Roberts?
Yes, J.D. Robb and Nora Roberts.
Well, back when she started J.D. Robb, it was much smarter to do it that way because you go like, oh yeah, the algorithms run things. Well, back when the algorithms didn't run things, there wasn't a lot of wiggle room. So you either ran it straight down the middle of the genre or you were super famous already for being Stephen King. So if she wanted to do anything different than she was already doing, she had to have two names. But now we have algorithms, and the algorithms, like, if you like DeAnna Knippling, you might also like
Shannon
this other name that is just happens to be DeAnna Knippling. They pick up on it because they go like, oh, these books were released at the same time. They have the same cover artist. They're under Wonderland Press. They're related.
Okay. Well, it is time once again to say goodbye. If we had a song, this is where we would sing it.
Auf Wiedersehen, goodnight.
I know the Lawrence Welk song, the goodnight song from Lawrence Welk. I'm not going to sing that.
If only we had thought ahead, we could recite the well-known poem, Go the Fuck to Sleep.
I'll be Samuel L. Jackson in this. That's my only reference other than Goodnight Moon.
Yep. Well, I hope everybody has a wonderful rest of their May. Yep. Happy Memorial Day weekend.
Oh.
If you would tell me when this is getting posted before ahead of time, I would have come up with something witty to say, but I don't.
May 15th.
May 15th. Okay.
I'm just ready for that.
By the time you hear this, I will be 50 years old, and there we go. So this is a birthday present, I guess.
Happy birthday.
Nice. All right. Thank you to everybody for listening. Thank you for DeAnna for coming on, and adieu to you and you.
Adieu. Goodbye.
We're just going to that.
Thank you for listening to Mysteries, Monsters, and Mayhem.
Find us on Facebook and Instagram or at our website, mysteriesmonstersmayhem.com.
Please like, rate, and review, follow, and share wherever your favorite podcasts are downloaded.
Thank you for listening and supporting our podcast. We'll be back with more shenanigans.